One of the goals for this project was to shed light on a number of freedoms in our charter that have largely been overlooked or ignored or, in some senses, forgotten. And what we want to do with this project is give some deep thought to how these freedoms might be given meaningful protection. One of the reasons that we think that's important is because the Charter itself says that these are freedoms that are fundamental to our very idea of a democratic society.
And yet we haven't paid enough attention to them. And the worry is that by not having paid attention to them over time, in addition to be forgotten, they can be perhaps even disrespected or forgotten and neglected to the extent that they lose their value, they lose their meaning. And when the moment comes in which they're tested, perhaps through a court case or in the political arena, if we've lost that sense of their importance, when the test comes, we may not give them their full value.
We're also trying to inform the public about the forgotten freedoms to help make people more aware of their charter freedoms. And when some of those haven't been receiving as much attention, this is a great opportunity to help make people aware of their own rights and freedoms.
What does fundamental actually mean? The dictionary says it means foundational.
The heart behind this project is to give those freedoms their proper due, to explore what it means to fully exercise those freedoms, and to fully exercise them, we have to understand them.
Freedom of conscience really is something that says you have the right to involve yourself in moral reasoning, to work through moral issues and problems, to reach your conclusions, to express those conclusions, to try to convince others about your conclusions, at least to some degree act out your conscientious conclusions, to be protected from the state coercing you into disobeying your conscience. That is, of course, that little sense of what's right to do and what's wrong to do.
If we want to have a democracy or we want to have neutrality and we want to have the ability to discuss with another person, we need the protection of freedom of opinion and freedom of belief, freedom of thought, because they allow you to become and to be and to follow your conscience and to make those actions. It really doesn't matter if you have freedom of expression if you don't have freedom of opinion. And what it really protects against is coercion. So coercion to believe things or coercion to agree to indoctrination. We need to have those deliberately put in there and defended, and those that aren't specifically identified are at risk of being denied. Freedoms that are forgotten, which is what we were dealing at, are at risk of being denied if they're not addressed and they're not talked about, and attention is being brought out about these, and it's very good. I think it protects our core liberty and pursuit of truth.
You can engage in expressive content, you can express yourself, but it doesn't really mean anything if the method through which you express it, whether it's through the press, if you're a journalist, through the internet, if you're an internet user, or if you're a worker engaged in a protest, labor picketing, or things of that nature. If you can actually engage in the medium that you're using to effectively engage in the expression you want to engage in, that's problematic. Section 2B was drafted and addresses this issue where it protects the expressive content, so what you're actually saying, but also in certain instances, the method through which you express it.
Peaceful assembly is actually one of those freedoms that is the least talked about by courts. One of the important aspects of freedom of assembly, peaceful assembly, is about the idea of how do you express dissent when there's an issue with the state or something else that's going on, and how can you do that in a way that actually makes sense? What that means, I think, is still up in the air, but it's important as being a way for the society to have a safety valve and be able to discuss issues as they come up.
People should gather together to express or to do things in furtherance of a common purpose. I believe if freedom of peaceful assembly is not fully enforced, a liberal society can't really function properly.
Freedom of association is protected in the Charter by Section 2D, and that's supposed to protect all of those associations, all of those groups of human beings that come together for a particular purpose. And that could be philanthropic, that could be social, cultural, religious, it could be a fraternal association, any of those kinds of things. And freedom of association is supposed to protect those from unjust interference by the state. One of the things we can do is promote diversity in this country, not just diversity of individuals. I think our country, generally speaking, does a really good job of that. But what about a diversity of institutions, a diversity of communities, a diversity of associations? And the best way we can do that, legally speaking, is through freedom of association.
These freedoms all have something important in common. freedom of expression, freedom of thought, opinion, and belief, religion, conscience, association, and peaceful assembly. These are all ways that ensure that we as individuals and as society as a whole can debate and dialogue and persuade one another and express and communicate ideas that push us toward a better understanding of the truth.
The workshop went really well. There was a lot of good papers presented, but I think we also got to be more than the sum of our parts. There was a lot of great discussion between people working on the different forgotten freedoms, some different kinds of questions that arose in common that give some more directions to go in, but also we'll be able to do a collection that brings all of this together, and in the course of that we'll keep engaging with one another. And so I think it was just a really great day in terms of bringing people together to think about these challenging topics.
With our workshop, we were really honored to have so many scholars from across the country participate in this project, all with differing views and interpretations of some of these freedoms and how they might be applied. But it was in that dialogue that we were able to have a very fruitful discussion and challenge one another and develop new ideas of how these forgotten freedoms could be rejuvenated.
There are a few end goals. One of those is to make a scholarly contribution in the form of the collection that will come out of the workshop. And a longer-term end goal from that is the hope that that scholarly contribution helps people who might be thinking about dealing with the forgotten freedoms, people that might end up litigating with them, courts that might end up using those forgotten freedoms in deciding cases.
There's always something to be learned, even from topics that maybe are a bit outside your expertise. There's always a benefit in terms of sharing this knowledge, dialoguing on these issues. Ultimately, in bringing more attention to these fundamental freedoms, hopefully will increase awareness and respect for human rights in Canada.
We've created this video series for you to learn more about the freedoms that you enjoy in Canada and how some of them have been forgotten. And we hope that through this series, you'll learn a little bit more about the guarantees that you enjoy in Canada.